Today on Quest, actress, environmental activist, model, TikTok celebrity, and all kinds of other things. Kalpana Pot joins me. Life is a quest for logic and reason. It is a quest to find balance between science and faith. Life is a quest for knowledge and understanding. But most importantly, it's a quest for personal discovery. Whatever your quest, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Welcome to Quest. Hello everyone, I'm your host, Todd Fischer, and this is Quest. For those of you that might be new listeners, let me tell you a little about me. I'm the founder of Metatomics and the author of the best-selling book, Metatomics, The Grand Design. I'm a philosopher, a theorist, a metaphysicist. I'm a perpetual pupil of theology, and I'm an expert in comparative religious study. I've also extensively researched the mind-body connection, anatomy, and physiology. I documented over 300 case studies while researching my book, all from a scientific perspective, with cases that ranged from near-death and out-of-body experiences to possession to past life experiences, as well as the metaphysical, the paranormal, and other unexplained cases of a spiritual nature. This podcast will bring you some of those astonishing stories, and in some cases by the people that actually lived them. From time to time, I'll be talking about important, perhaps even controversial issues from both spiritual and scientific points of view. The world we live in is ever-changing, and there's often a conflict between spirituality and science, and I wanted to bring you this podcast to balance that equation. It will show you how we know what we know, and there's still so much we don't know. For me, curiosity is part of what makes us human. It's the joy of discovery. It's what drives us. It's our quest. Hi everyone, today on Quest, I have a really interesting guest. Kalpana Pot joins me. She is an interesting woman. We had a great conversation. She is an actress, a model, an environmental activist, an astronomy expert. She has YouTube channel, Instagram channels, TikTok channels, all very popular. She does all kinds of cool things. And today she talks about her childhood and how she grew up and her journey to LA to be an actress and how she got TikTok famous, talking about astronomy and all kinds of other things. We dig deep into all kinds of topics. It was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Kalpana. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited about this one. I always love when I get a fellow astronomy nerd on the show.
Absolutely. We all got to stick together, so I'm glad to be here.
It's really cool. I've had a couple people kind of similar in orbiting this, we'll say, on my pod here and there. So I always like when I can kind of get someone else new on to talk about what's happening, because it seems like this has been a huge year for astronomy, for space. Like right. 2020 isn't weird enough. We've got all kinds of crazy space news happening.
Absolutely. That's so true.
And I saw you on TikTok. So we're going to talk about your TikTok. We're going to talk about astronomy with KP. And we're going to get to that in a bit, but I want to go backwards a little bit. Let's talk about young Kalpana for a second. Where were you born and where did you grow up at? What was your childhood like?
Oh, sure. So I was actually born in Botswana. And so for people who don't know, which is most people, it's the country above South Africa. And I was only there until I was about 5.5, maybe close to 6. And although I was very young, it still is oddly enough, some of the best memories that I have. It was just like a magical place. And I feel as though, this is just a side note, but I'm a huge animal lover. And I feel as though growing up there is what kind of just influenced my soul to be such a huge lover of animals. And so part of my charity work is more so geared towards that. But anyway, after that, my family and I moved to the States and we came to Staten Island, which, no offense to anyone who's listening who's from there, but it was awful. Especially for like a kid who only lived there for 3 years to say that. People were just really shitty. I'm sure, I mean, who knows? Things are probably better now, but it was not a great experience as a kid. I mean, some parts were okay, but overall, I say that because compared to where I eventually moved to, which is Ohio, people there were so much nicer. And I spent most of my life there and went to undergrad there at Ohio State. And then eventually myself moved to Los Angeles. When was it? Mid 2012. Good Lord, time flies. And I've been here ever since. I do have really close family ties and bonds. So I go back to Ohio twice a year. However, actually majority of this year due to COVID, I've been there. Currently, right now, I'm back in Los Angeles for a shoot, but most of this year has been in Ohio. So that's kind of my life journey, literally moving west every so often. So hopefully now I'm planted and I'm not going to go even further west.
Yeah. Well, you can't go wrong with like Midwest hospitality. I grew up in Indiana, so I was just a state away from you. Absolutely. Way before you got to Ohio, but I was in Indiana, so it was those are interesting states. I really like it in there, and it's a good place to grow up. It is, ultimately not a place I want to die in, but a good place to have grown up in.
That's exactly what I tell people. Like when they ask me what Ohio was like, I said it was a great place to grow up, but not a place I wanted to stay forever. And it depends on your ambitions in life. For a lot of people I knew, they married their high school sweethearts, became teachers, and now at our age they have like 4 kids, and I am, good Lord, couldn't even think of having that life. So for me, I've always wanted to pursue entertainment because I grew up singing and dancing. And so I was like, oh, let me be an actor. So I moved out here to do that. And to be honest, I've been very lucky to booked the amount of work I have booked, but there's still a long way to go. And honestly, acting is just, it's as a business, a really volatile career, but as a craft, it makes me a better human being because literally my job is to put myself into other people's shoes. And you don't get more empathy than by doing that. And empathy is what I think we need more of in the world anyway. So despite, the bad or like silly reputation actors have, the ones who pursue it for the craft and the beauty of the art are truly some of like the most amazing people I know, just because of what it does to you. And also with that being said, astronomy, which is my other passion, has also made me a better human being because you just ponder the vastness of the universe and everything just seems so small and minuscule here, which I have commented on in a more cynical way on my TikTok, but it wasn't meant to be like, oh, none of us fucking matter because we're pieces of shit. It's like nothing that what I mean by that is the things that we, stress about and fight about and all the wars and religion, all of that is so petty. And when you ponder the fact that we're a speck of dust in the grand scheme of things, that's what I mean by we don't matter, is all the stupid shit we fight about. So yeah.
Did you grow up with a big family?
I have not really, actually. My parents and then my 2 older sisters, and I'm also Indian if people can't guess that by the name. But there are some stereotypes that are true because literally everybody else in my family became a doctor except for me. But I tell them that maybe one day I'll play one full-time on TV. So
that's right. That's right. I've actually done that. So
oh yeah, there you go. Absolutely. So
did you grow up spiritual or religious?
Yes. And again, that's something people assume of me, especially on social media, because I'm so science-minded that I'm complete atheist. And I'm not. Okay, I grew up Hindu and I still do practice it. But the thing is, it's hard to even say that one practices that religion because there's no strict rules per se. You can go to the temple, you kind of just do things on your own. But what I absolutely love about it, and honestly, if I wasn't Hindu, I probably would be atheist or maybe Buddhist. But what I love about it is that based on my readings and what I've heard, it's the most scientifically accurate religion. And it's a religion that doesn't contradict science either. So it believes in evolution and, some kind of Big Bang. It doesn't really talk about, at least as far as my knowledge of it, the beginnings of the universe. But, if science is showing evidence of a Big Bang type of theory, there is stuff in our scriptures to support that idea. And so it's very liberal and liberating and, literally just about be a good person and live and let live. And again, has some science to back it up. So it wasn't forced on us, because you really can't force Hinduism onto anybody. You kind of just practice on your own. And I think just having that freedom is what allowed me to stick with it. Because like I said, if it wasn't that religion and a one that's way more strict, I probably would have abandoned it altogether. So yeah.
Sure. And you went to Ohio State. What's your degree in? Or did you take acting courses there? What
I
spurred
didn't.
you to?
Yeah, I was a business major. And to be honest, and it sounds like such a childish, kind of arrogant, privileged thing to say, but I just got a degree to get a degree, knowing that I was always going to move to LA to be an actor. Because I think in my household too, you can't not go to college. And I'm technically the least educated person in my house. But looking back on it now that I'm older and I'm fine with my degree, I just wish I didn't take it for granted as much as I did. Because now in my life, I see the value of education. To me, education is the most important thing in the entire world. And if university was free, I would be enrolled for the rest of my life just to learn things. I mean, you can learn things on your own now, which I do. For some reason, just having like that degree at the end of it just makes it more satisfying. But yeah, so I pursued business. But again, it was literally just to get a degree so I can finish it early and then move to LA to be one of the actors.
Right. And how has that journey been for you? You've done some TV. You have some pretty interesting credits to your name. Tell us a little about what you've done, what you've been doing.
Sure. I have a lot of success in the commercial world, which, to be honest, unless you're a series regular on a TV show, commercial money is where it's at. So I'm in the SAG-AFTRA union, and I have had good success mostly in the TV world, but you don't feel like you're successful fully yet until you have a series regular contract. And I have tested for a few pilots, just none have ever come through. So it's almost kind of like, you're waiting for your chance. But I've enjoyed the journey because, as I said, it's just made me a better human being. When you're placing yourself into other characters' minds and other people's minds, you just become a better human being. Like one of the characters I played before in a class was somebody who was on a very different political mindset than I am, and they were anti-abortion and things like that. And as much as I judged the character at first, once I put in the work, like I could finally see that side and that point of view. As Kalpana, I don't agree, but at least I understand where these people are coming from. So it's been so rewarding just because it's made me a better person. As far as the business goes, I've honestly been luckier than most to be able to make my income off of it and not necessarily have to have a side job. My only side job is to do astronomy at an observatory. And it's very minimal, like 10 hours a week. And more so, I kind of just do it because I can. I live in LA and it's my other passion, but it's been a good career, always up and down. And I've been lucky that this year during a pandemic, I've booked 3 national commercials, which is a lot of money, which is awesome. Yeah. But then, next year, there's no guarantee of anything. So I think if you're someone who needs that kind of stability, it's a very difficult world. And the older you get, the more pressure you put on yourself for that. But actually, just this year itself, my close friends and I finished writing our first pilot together. And it centers around being a woman in STEM. And as far as I can see, I haven't really seen a story like this out there because it's a dark comedy. And so hopefully this can gain some traction. You kind of start pushing yourself to just create your own meaningful content if you're not really clicking with the things that you're getting, like the same old stories, especially on prime time, and like the 1-hour crime dramas and that kind of stuff over and over. You're like, you know what? I have my own unique story to tell. So let me do that. And when I meet new actors, I tell them that that's my biggest recommendation to them, apart from always being in class, is to really just figure out what kind of stories you want to tell and tell it. So that's been my years so far in my journey, but I love it and I'm looking forward to more.
Right. So, it's interesting because if we went back to the beginning of this year, back to March, before the world shut down, the top news story was Harvey Weinstein. Have you experienced a negative part of Hollywood? Have you seen the dirty side of it, the underbelly, since you've been there? Have you had a relatively good experience?
I've had nothing but good experience, strangely enough. And it makes me think that, did I not actually get my foot in the door as much as I thought I have? But no, I've met some of the top casting directors in this town, big producers of primetime shows. I've worked with celebrities. I have never myself encountered anything negative. And it's almost like, I feel almost sad saying that, because it's like, not that I want to be in that situation, but if I could at least open my eyes to it and help other people. But it's sad that it's happened, and obviously not at all surprising, and truly just quite angering. But I'm glad that something like the Me Too movement came out of it, because now it's like the pendulum's kind of swinging the other way. And I don't want innocent men to feel afraid, but to some degree, it's giving them empathy to realize what women deal with daily. So as far as my experience has gone, I haven't encountered anything negative. I remember one of my favorite experiences was shooting a TV show called Hot in Cleveland, because I got to work with Betty White, and Golden Girls is like my family's all-time favorite show. But I remember it was a week-long shoot, and one of my days on set, one of the extras asked me, she's like, "How did you get the part?" And I was like, "Oh, you know, I met the casting director, auditioned, and then they booked me." And she's like, "Oh, you didn't have to like sleep with anybody?" I was like, "No." And all her view on this industry was that that's the only thing you had to do to get somewhere. And I was like, "Girl, no, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. And no one who's decent and credible will ever force you to do those kinds of things." I'm sure, you know, maybe on like a bigger scale, I mean, they definitely happen. So if I was further along in my career, I would have encountered something. But it's honestly surprising to me that I've encountered literally zero harassment from anyone in the industry.
Wow. That's good. That's
yeah,
good. That's
absolutely.
good. Yeah. It's so many people aren't that lucky, for sure.
Right. Absolutely. And I just, you know, I don't know why some people get singled out more than others. I think there's something about predators that they feel like they can sniff out some kind of vulnerability in somebody. I'm not sure what it is, but no matter what kind of so-called weakness they can sniff out, it's wrong no matter what, to put somebody in that kind of situation just because you have the power to do it. So I'm glad that it's finally getting cleansed in this town, and hopefully it happens everywhere. And, you know, in my writing this pilot I did with my friends, the point of it was to actually, one of the themes was supposed to talk about harassment that happens in the STEM workplace, because it's also rampant there and nobody ever talks about it. Our theme for our current draft is pushing away from that just a little. It's going to be something that would be exposed later on. Right now we're focusing a bit more on mental health. But anyway, the point is, I'm hoping that the STEM field also goes through this cleansing, because that's absolute bullshit. And it's like nothing, like no one ever thinks about STEM when it comes to harassment, but it's awful. So,
You know, it's there will be a kind of a long, slow process of other industries adopting these new policies or policing themselves for activities that might happen, because it happens in academia, it happens in big companies, it happens in a lot of places. It's just that Hollywood has the exposure on it right now. It has the spotlight on it about it happening there. And Hollywood is actually, it's got so many problems. Like that was just one of many problems that it has. And that was how women were being treated, typically by men in the business. Mm-hmm. There are limited cases of directors, I'm not going to say on the podcast, that are dead now, but you could probably figure out who it was. There were female directors that were just as predatory to women. There's definitely male casting directors that prey on males. And some of these things have never been addressed or resolved because they're so small. The cases are so small. And then, of course, there's Hollywood pedophilia, which is like the big topic right now. And that's a whole other just, you know, terrible mess that has to get fixed, and no one really knows how to go about doing it. And I actually, the podcast that I'm talking about hasn't aired yet, but I do get into this with a psychologist, and I talk about this. There's actually rings of pedophiles. This is a true story. There are rings of pedophiles that want to make pedophilia a sexual preference. And there's a huge movement for this to happen. And it's just insane to me that this is even being talked about or could potentially be considered, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I have actually heard of that, just minimally. I've not like read up on it or even spoke to a psychologist, because that would be so interesting and informative. But I think that's also ridiculous. It's kind of like they want to make it their own sexual orientation, like being gay or queer of any kind. It's like, you know, the the thing with the LGBTQ community, it's consensual and you're born that way. And granted, maybe there's some weird wiring in someone's brain that makes them a pedophile. I think it just comes from just awful abuse that happened to you. And that's the psychological damage that happened. But no matter what, when you're a pedophile, you're affecting somebody who is innocent and is not consenting. So you can try to justify it as much as you want.
Yeah.
But, no, you're damaging people along the way. It's not the same sexual orientation in a consensual way.
One of their arguments is about when the line is drawn between when something is pedophilia versus when it is just a statutory rape. And I think this is the weirdest thing where they think this imaginary line is at, you know, like it's a crime either way. We're talking about anything under 18 is still a crime.
Exactly.
Where they're trying to put a line in at is just baffling to me.
Yeah, there can't be a line when someone's brain isn't fully developed yet to make these kinds of decisions. So that's the point of statutory or pedophilia, is that it's wrong, is because you're preying on someone who's innocent, whose brain can't actually understand the situation that they're in. So it shouldn't even be something that's addressed. It's like it's wrong.
It's the weirdest thing, because obviously there's like pedophiles everywhere. They're in Ohio, they're in Indiana, they're in California, they're in all these places. But in most of the rest of the country, they're not really organized. But in New York and LA, they tend to have clubs, and then clubs talk and they lobby for things. And it's just like insane to me that this will probably be a conversation that will continue for many years.
Yeah, definitely.
And we'll probably just get bigger, you know?
Exactly.
So we'll tune in 5 years on this podcast and we'll see where this is at. So
we'll come back on October.
Revisit this.
Exactly. And see where we're at now. So it's so true. You know, I watched a lot of Law and Order SVU growing up. I mean, I still do. And so, yeah, just certainly seeing those stories. Granted, I know it's fiction, but at the same time, a lot of that shit actually happens. And I did see, even in some episodes, how organized the pedophilia rings are. And I do believe that that's drawn from real inspiration and investigations. So yeah, it's scary, just that underground world, because, you know, you see LA and it's just like, oh, palm trees and like pretty people and like stupid reality people, and just seems so superficial, but like literally underground, there's so much shit that goes on. So it's scary. And it's I just almost finished watching that Jeffrey Epstein documentary on Netflix, and it was so disturbing and sad, and made me so angry as to how this narcissistic sociopath was untouchable because of his power and wealth. And just, it's so angering as to what they did to take advantage of these girls who came from broken homes, because again, they exploited a weakness in them. And it's just, it's infuriating. And I just want all those types of people to literally, I don't know. I mean, you know, I guess I should say I don't wish ill will on others, but for people like that, I wish them the worst, absolute worst.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched that documentary. That was very unsettling.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, I mean, to be untouchable like that, you can just cause a path of destruction and nothing can happen to you. So it's ridiculous. You know, I'm not actually a huge fan of social media. I think it does cause a lot of damage. But one thing I do like about it is the fact that you can't really get away with anything too much anymore because of the public outcry. So, you know, if there's a case, created case against somebody, let's say like Jeffrey Epstein, and then, you know, he doesn't get convicted, you're going to have so much backlash on social media and the public to say something, to put pressure on these prosecutors to actually do something. So I kind of like that it's giving people a voice in that way. But there are things where it's like, you know, anti-science and conspiracy theories. That's the part that I can't stand about social media.
On social media, it's just such a weird thing, because it really is like the Wild West in a way.
Right.
And, you know, everyone can be a masked outlaw. You can not even be who your profile picture is. You can completely build a completely different version of who you are for social media, because there's really no way for people to know who they're really talking to or what's real or what's not real. But it also can influence a lynch mob justice. And a lynch mob justice, like you would have gotten in the Old West, isn't really necessarily a great form of justice, because we're lucky to be in America where people can still have a fair trial. Right. You know, the point is to, you know, prove that they're guilty. But for social media, you are guilty automatically. Yeah, that's right. And in cases where people really didn't do anything wrong, they're completely destroyed online. Their reputations are ruined. They're unemployable. And that's that's the hazard of it, because you can't just go back and erase all that. Like, you just can't remove it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the real, and people don't, I think anyone on social media doesn't understand the power they have when they do that they are literally ruining people that may not necessarily deserve to be ruined, or maybe not to that extent.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's like people who aren't informed well are becoming the loudest voices. In a case like Jeffrey Epstein, I think a public outcry for action, before he quote unquote suicide was great. But again, that's because for sure that this person was a predator. For other people where there's an allegation and they're not proven guilty just yet, yeah, you're absolutely right. The public outcry has a huge damaging effect on that, for sure.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And even people, like Rose McGowan coming forward has pretty much sacrificed her career to come forward and do this, because it was already a thing several years ago, where if you spoke about something inappropriate that happened on set, you're now deemed troublesome, and that word gets around and you get employed less. That was going on. That was absolutely going on. But Rose will be lucky to ever get a film at this point. Like, she's probably just going to be an activist at this point, and that's all she'll be able to do, and that's how she'll have to make her living. And so even though she exposed something big, she was a hero, she will still not be welcome back in Hollywood. It's a weird double standard, Yeah,
it really is. It's so true. It's like, Hollywood, absolutely. They'll just see you as a troublemaker, or they now just associate you with that thing that you did. So they're like, oh, we can't have you play this character because people just know you now as, this like vigilante almost. So because it takes away from the character. And, actually, because you're seen now as a troublemaker, we're not going to have you back. It's so sad. That's true.
It's so weird, all these weird double standards and things that happen. And we're going to get into some of this, with you, with your TikTok, the kind of the anti-science people and how vocal they are. I want to know, but what piqued your interest or curiosity in astronomy? Where did that happen at? Were you little when you started getting into the stars and the moon, or what?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's great because I don't actually have a well-defined answer, because it certainly happened when I was a kid. I feel like I was born just being so fascinated by the universe and what's out there. I think to me, it just represents endless possibility and, I don't know, hope for something. We're not alone on this planet. There's over 7 billion of us, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because overpopulation is so damaging. But anyway, that's a different subject matter. Plus, as I said, I'm a huge animal lover. There's been billions of species. So we're not alone. But for some reason, we all still feel a little alone. And I feel as though a lot of people look to the universe because they're just waiting for something to happen that's going to just shake everything up. And that's always been my hope too. At this point in 2020, I am looking forward to the alien invasion that's going to happen inevitably at some point. But what I would want from something like that, though, is that humanity kind of takes a deeper look at itself collectively and changes its ways. And that's what I love about movies like Arrival, or I don't know, I can't think of others right now. Contact, which is one of my all-time favorites. It's like this huge worldwide event happened, and now humanity is going to be different, hopefully in a better way because of it. And so I don't have a definitive moment where I saw an image and all of a sudden it piqued my interest. I just truly feel like it's a part of my soul, maybe from a past life, who knows. But if I had to pick one image, though, it would be the iconic Pleiades star cluster, which is about 444 light years away, I believe. And that to me is just such a breathtaking image. It's so mysterious and just beautiful and simple, and it's still absolutely my favorite. So if I had to pick an image, it would be that one. But honestly, I think it's just a part of me.
Wow. So you don't even remember being a little kid, or what really spurred you? It was just always there.
It was just always there. It wasn't like because, I looked through a telescope for the first time. Honestly, that didn't even happen until I was older in life. It's just, just being able to lay on the grass and just look at the sky is, I think, it was just always a part of me. It's strange.
Wow. Yeah, I was very interested in astronomy when I was in middle school. And and I got, a telescope, and would, set it up there in the field in Indiana and look at all the stars would be really bright, and I would put it on the moon, and the neighborhood kids would come by and they would, look in the telescope. It was just fascinating to me. And I remember what kind of spurred my interest toward it. I was always looking to the skies, I'll say to the heavens, but I remember I had a grandmother who had a bunch of old National Geographic magazines, and there was a National Geographic magazine that was one of the moon landing issues. It was an old one, and in it there was like a moon map, and the issue, National Geographic had like incredible photos in it, and I was just like, this is amazing, all this stuff, and I'm like, 11 years old, 10, 11, 12 years old, and I'm just like, mesmerized by the moon and what it was like, and how far away it was, and just like really kind of possessed by that. And in high school I wanted to be an astronaut. That was my thing.
Sure.
And of course those dreams like really go off once they tell you when you're a senior, you can't do that.
Right. Yeah, true.
Go get a job over here, work in this retail store and get in the management like that's what everyone steers you toward. Go in the military or go do this or that.
Right.
But I also didn't have good vision, and that was like the first thing they would rule out. And this was before you could get your eye surgery done, and all. So I just knew that was a fleeting thing for me. But my interest goes way back, and that's why I still like to kind of follow it when I can. And when I see people like you, it reminds me of the passion I had for it, and that's why I like guests like this. You mentioned some of the movies you like, though. I will say that I have we talked about this before the podcast started, but I kind of have a little bit more of a negative slant when it comes to like sci-fi and like the extraterrestrials. I think of like the Keanu Reeves movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right. Yeah.
Going to come down and lay waste to all of us. But at the very end, we're going to cut everyone a break because humans finally realized that at the precipice of extinction, we better probably change. And I feel like that's where we're going to go. Getting 7 billion people to get on the same page with everything today is a near impossibility. Mathematically, completely improbable.
Right.
And I think, when we're looking death right in the face, that's when we're going to make the hard choices. Those hard choices, it's hard to know what that will be. Do we need to cull 1 billion people from the planet in order to save the planet? Could you? Would you? I mean, it's crazy to even think about those things, but one day we're out of resources, and then you have to make the big decisions.
Right. That's so true. You brought up a good point. I actually love that movie, and you hit the line right on the spot. Only at the precipice do we change. And it's so interesting because that's so human nature. I mean, look at people who, wait to have a heart attack until they decide to change their diet. And so unfortunately, the problem with climate change is because it's not a sudden event, and that's why it's being so contested, unfortunately, despite what scientists are saying. The people who study this shit, it has to be politicized now. But anyway, it's like the problem with climate change is because it's kind of like a slow burn. It's not enough changes happening to combat it because it doesn't just hit you all at once.
Right. We were talking about this before we started recording, and it's interesting to me. It's like looking in the mirror. You look in the mirror every day. You don't really see much of a change. It's all subtle. And then one day you compare photos that are 10 years apart and you go, wow, when did I get that old?
Right.
And that's how the earth is. You just walk out the door every day. The sky is still blue. I'm still breathing the same air. Like nothing seems to be changing. I'm still mowing the lawn. I'm still doing all the stuff I did. The grass is green. Like everything seems to be going okay.
Right.
But really, it is all falling apart around us, and you don't realize it. And only when you don't even see the lake evaporate, Right. It takes years for you to even realize, gosh, I thought the water was higher, and then one day something's not there anymore. I'll tell you. Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're absolutely right about that. It's like, despite, and I know we did talk about this right before we started, but despite this year itself in California having 5 of the worst all-time fires was this year itself. I guarantee you, sadly, it's still nothing's going to happen next year. It's not like, fire season only happens once and that's it. It happens every single year, but yet like nothing is changing and it's only getting worse. So it's like, despite having such in your face awful devastation like that, it's still not enough for collective change to happen, unfortunately.
You know, I don't know if you liked this movie or not, but did you watch An Inconvenient Truth? Did you watch that with Al Gore?
I did. Yeah. That's actually what opened my eyes. I was in, I think, high school when that came out, and that's what opened my eyes to climate change. And that's the moment I became very passionate about it being a cause of mine.
I'll tell you my feelings on it.
Sure.
I actually met Al Gore when he was running for president. And he was a nice man. As a politician, not really that much of a fan, but as a person, I thought he was a nice enough guy. But what really made me a fan of Al Gore was that documentary. But what he did in the documentary made me realize how hopeless it all was. And I don't think that wasn't his intention. His intention was to inspire people. Let's go out there and fix things, you know. Sure. Here's how the industrialized world's working. Here's what's going on. And this is what we can do. And, you know, this is awareness. But at the end of it, I was left with the feeling that this is such an epic problem that there's not even really a way to go about addressing it. It's too big to fix. There's too much money, too many people involved, too much stuff that has to happen. It's an impossible fix. The Inconvenient Truth became kind of the impossible fix to me because it was just too lofty, you know, too lofty. Like, I want you to think about this. This is the example I always use. In California, where you're at, it took years to get straws made illegal, right?
Right.
And to make straws illegal, just straws, they had to lobby the state for years. They had to talk to the manufacturers of straws. They needed to do consumer studies of whether people would be able to live without straws.
Right.
Manufacturers of straws had to find other products to make or they were going to go out of business. Like, all this stuff was happening from the bureaucracy level all the way down to the consumer. There was a study done that took years just to get straws outlawed in California only.
Right. That's so true.
That's not even the other 49 states. That's not even the rest of the world. And that's not even the biggest problem in the plastics industry.
Yeah.
And that's why it's an impossible fix.
I know, it really is. No, that's a good point. It's like the amount of bullshit you have to go through just to make change happen is insane. So it's like, you know, we need to rely on the government to do something, but there is some responsibility that everyone can take. You know, I know a lot of people don't feel like it's going to make that much of a difference. I'm part of that as well, but I still feel like, you know, you do what you can along the way. For me, it's not eating meat because of the amount of greenhouse gas the meat industry produces. Yep. And then also I actually recommend us. So a good friend of mine, she's studying environmental science, and she told me about how soil is now being studied and talked about a lot as to how it can combat climate change. And coincidentally, there's also a documentary on Netflix called Kiss the Ground, which talks about that. And being as well versed in the climate change world as I am, I never even heard of this being part of it. And just the idea that soil from around the world itself can, I mean, it's more so to do with forestry and agriculture. So like the biggest way to combat climate change is to take better care of your forests and also figure out a better way to do agriculture, because of the way we do it now with tilling, you don't give enough time for the soil to regenerate and breathe. And so it's releasing all of this carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. But if you have a regenerative type of agriculture where it's almost like, honestly, the answer is just do what the Native Americans did, because they knew nature and they knew the land. But you would allow the cows to graze and, you know, put their hooves on the ground and push everything back into it. It was just a more sustainable way to do things. And you can keep reusing the same land. You just move the cows to a different pasture every season while the land that you just used regenerates itself. And just by doing that, you're actually pulling a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and back into the ground. And so it's hard for me to fully speak on because I'm not well versed in it yet, but I recommend for people to check that documentary out on Netflix and also read up about all the studies that they've done so far about how soil itself can help combat climate change in a huge, surprising way. Honestly, it could actually make a huge difference.
I agree with all that. There is a great deal of indigenous wisdom that we've lost along the way.
Yeah.
The Aborigines talked about that when the Australia fires hit. You know,
Right.
They talked about, well, this is what would normally have been done to make sure this didn't happen. And people weren't listening. You know, it was pushing the Aborigines away, and we don't care about your indigenous wisdom, and then everything burns. But it was the thing that they combated for centuries,
Right.
that they took care of, that they were aware would happen. So That's definitely, there's so much truth to that. I still think the lowest common denominator of all this, though, the problem is overpopulation. Because if we keep growing people, we're going to need more resources, and the resources have to be done quicker. They take up more space. There's more stuff that has to be produced. And that is ultimately our problem, is that we might be busting at the seams right now of what the Earth's capabilities are.
Yeah, definitely. It's so true, especially in the energy standpoint. You know, we're still so, in the grand scheme of things, primitive when you think about we use coal and things like that. So I was hoping that sometime soon, hopefully within our lifetime, you know, we can figure out how to actually harness energy directly from the sun. I mean, an option of that obviously being solar, but even more less expensive, efficient ways to do it. And then that way you don't have to rely on Earth's natural resources and destroy the planet anymore. So hopefully one day we'll get there. But who knows though, it might destroy ourselves before we do.
We'll get to another planet, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
To do the same thing.
That's the problem. You know, I love astronomy and I love space exploration, but that's kind of where it stops. I'm all for exploration, but I'm I am against colonization, just because I don't believe that just because we destroy one planet, we should just go and do the same stupid practices on another one.
Let's get into this a bit. You know, the International Space Station was like kind of the first real foothold for us to get to other places. And now there's talk about a moon base. There's talk about you going to Mars. I'm skeptical of the Mars mission. I think whoever goes on that mission, it's a one-way trip if you make it there. I think it's really a terrible idea to send humans. You're sending them to their death. I don't believe our technology is good enough to get people there and for them to, you know, establish any kind of base on the planet. I think there's too much that can go wrong.
Right.
But I hope not. It would be great to see someone go to Mars, but I'm not that hopeful for it. And
no, I totally understand. I mean, I feel as though people like Elon Musk and the billionaires are kind of rushing because they want to be the first, but like, bro, you can't rush this process. Mars is a very long trip away and completely, what's the word? Hostile towards.
Hostile. Yeah. And what I was going to say next about it was why Mars, like, why aren't we looking at a place that might be more inhabitable, such as like Europa or someplace that would be, you know, have water or have something we could use. Like Mars, it just seems like a terrible, inhospitable place to go.
Right.
And I question some of these choices, you know?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I know NASA does eventually want to go and dig into Europa. When I say dig into, I mean drill through the ice, even though it's so ridiculously thick, it actually would take many years to even get through that ice to see if there's even water to begin with. More than likely there is. But yeah, it would be a much better place to go. But I think Mars, just because it's right next door, and Venus is sure as shit not an option because it's just...
Well, we can't because Russia claimed it, so we technically can't go there now.
Oh, yeah, right? Exactly. Well, despite their atmosphere being like 90 times thicker than ours and the surface temperature being 900 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not at all an option. But interesting find of the phosphine gas on it.
Yeah. You just did a thing on that. That was like a big deal. You know, we have a building block there.
Yeah, exactly. It's just interesting to find this gas in the upper clouds just because, so here on Earth, it indicates life because it's a byproduct of certain organic material breaking down or microbes basically exhaling this. So the fact that they found it on Venus, which I also heard, and I have to verify this, but it was almost kind of found by accident because I think scientists were trying to create a model of what complete uninhabitability would be. And obviously you're looking at Venus. And so when they were looking at it, it's like, wait, holy shit, never mind. We found some phosphine. But I would say 99.9% that it's not because of life. And it's just some kind of geochemical process that happens on Venus that happens to create the phosphine, because I can't imagine how any kind of life can live on this planet, including, I mean, maybe extremophiles, but I don't even think that. I think at 900 degrees Fahrenheit, molecules in your DNA can't even stay together. So I don't even think extremophiles can handle 900 degrees, but I could be wrong. There could be extremophiles that we just don't know about that can literally live anywhere. But I think Mars is the next place just because it happens to be the closest that is not Venus. And also recently they did confirm the presence of liquid water underneath the surface of the South Pole. So I think maybe that helps them make the decision to at least try to get there.
Yeah. But they won't want to set up a base on a pole. They'll want to set it up somewhere else where you're conveniently 10,000 miles away from your nearest water source.
Yeah, exactly, right. Just to make life harder. That's so true. Yeah.
There seems to be that there's more and more exoplanets being discovered, like constantly. There's so many exoplanets being discovered, it almost isn't a news story anymore. It's like, okay,
yeah, I know.
There's another shadow of a possible planet. I want you to tell my listeners who aren't familiar with it, what defines the habitable zone for a planet, what these exoplanets are, how they're being found.
Absolutely. So another cute word for it is called the Goldilocks zone, where, Goldilocks, something was too hot or too cold and something was just right. So the habitable zone, aka the Goldilocks zone, is where the conditions are just right for a planet to have liquid water on it. And liquid water is very important to life because liquid water as a molecule has polarity. So it allows nutrients to move through your organic body. You can't do that with other type of liquid substances. So water, because of its molecular structure, is very important to life. And again, it has to be liquid. It can't be ice or evaporated gas because that's not going to do anything to help life. So we call the Goldilocks zone just a place where conditions are right for a planet to have liquid water. And honestly, that's kind of the only definition of it. Now, whether or not the planet has an atmosphere, that's all just subjective to the planet itself. But as long as it is in the Goldilocks zone, it has a potential to have liquid water.
If we were ever to discover alien life, what do you think it'll look like?
I think if we ever discover it, it would probably be single-celled or some kind of weird bug. But if we were ever encountered with like actual evolved life, even like the animals on another planet, I don't know, everything has to adapt to the planet that it's on, but I can't imagine that it's so ridiculously different than what we have here. I mean, it would be different, don't get me wrong, but something that's like off the cuff, I can't even imagine. I'm like looking around my apartment and I'm like, what could it look like that's so weird? But it would be different, but not like weirdly magical, if that makes sense.
I ask people what they think alien life will look like, and I get people that are in pop culture that are like, oh, it'll be like Alien or Predator or, E.T. Yeah. It'll be like, everyone's got like a million, and they're like, what do you think it'll look like? And I'm like, it'll look like the Blob. If it looks like anything, if anything, that's probably the most accurate depiction of alien life we've ever had in cinema is the Blob, because it'll probably really be something like that.
Right.
More than, but I always think it's interesting. I always try to tell people this, that on planet Earth, 3 uniquely different life forms that you can think about to show you kind of the wide range of what we could have. Mm-hmm. A human being, a tree, and a jellyfish.
Right. It's so true.
All different life forms, completely different from one another.
Exactly. I know we have just like a crazy clusterfuck of species on this planet. And that's why I absolutely love Earth. And that's what makes me an environmentalist, is just because I just think it's so amazing, the endless life that we have here. And think of so 99% of all species that have ever existed on this planet are all extinct. So think about how much life has existed even before us, and species that aren't around anymore. It's just like life was so easy to form and evolve here. And I just think it's amazing. And, as much as I believe that life absolutely exists elsewhere in the universe, just based on probability alone, how could it not? We're still the only planet we know of that has life. And I think that just should further emphasize not taking it for granted and actually taking care of it, just because of the life that we have here. It's absolutely amazing. And you hit them right on the spot. I mean, like a tree, a person, and a freaking jellyfish. It's crazy, just the diversity that's here. And I just think it's amazing.
Yeah, look at the 3 of those right next to each other. It's just really insane. Or you could say, you could insert octopus for jellyfish, because octopus are such an interesting creature anyways.
Yeah, totally. They're so intelligent too. So
let's see. I'm going to give you like some lightning round questions here.
Okay.
With just quick answers. I want to know. I want to get into your head a little bit more about stuff.
Sure.
For you, is Pluto a planet?
Yes, because I agree with Dr. Alan Stern. So he's the reason we have images of Pluto, because he spearheaded the New Horizons mission that got to Pluto. When was it? July 14th, I think, of 2015. It flew by. And he's actually a planetary scientist. If he thinks Pluto should be a planet, who the hell are we to argue? But it's not planetary scientists that made the decision. It was astronomers. The International Astronomical Union is the one that got together and said that it shouldn't be. But if a planetary scientist says it should be based on his criteria, then I would agree with him. So if he says yes, then I say yes. I'll go with whatever he says.
What's your favorite planet?
Earth.
Earth, all right. So our moon clearly has an effect on the planet Earth. Does it affect humans?
You know, I think physically it kind of does, right? I mean, wouldn't the gravitational force even on like a small cellular scale affect us? Because it does affect the tides. So I'd imagine it could have an effect on the cells in your body. If you're talking like mentally of when people go crazy during a full moon, that I can't really say, just because being as science-minded as I am, I just don't know how I feel about astrology. And I say that with coming from a culture that believes very strongly in astrology. I mean, we get marriages arranged based on astrology, but I've just always been a huge skeptic because I don't want that to be an excuse for behavior. You know what I mean? So that's why I always fight back against it, even though I have many friends, especially in LA, who are so strong about it when they're like, oh, you know, Mercury's in retrograde and that's why it explains why people are being shitty. I'm like, no, I don't think that's an excuse for people being shitty right now. So I just don't like the fact that it's become an excuse. But I would think, you know, on like a physical scale, it could absolutely have an effect on us just based on the gravity.
What is our moon's proper name?
I don't know if I know that, actually. I've just always known it to be moon.
Yeah, we've always known it to be moon. It's actually called Luna.
Luna.
Is its proper name.
I was thinking Luna. And then, you know, every culture will call it something, like in India, depending on the language, it's called Chandra. But Luna, yeah, that did come to my mind, but I thought that's more of like a children's storybook name, but I guess it's the official name.
Yeah, it's the official name. What's your favorite constellation?
Great question. I think maybe Orion, because it's one of the only ones, I believe, that the northern and southern hemisphere can see. So I think that's
my favorite one. That's my favorite one. All right.
Nice. It's really easy to identify.
Is the Earth round or a sphere or flat in a circle?
I don't even know if I should dignify this, but it's definitely round.
Fight the flat earthers on this one. I want you to give it to them.
I can't believe that centuries later, this is still a goddamn question again. So because of quarantine, I recently watched an old Disney movie called Sword in the Stone, which I think is so adorable. And there's a part there where Merlin is talking to Arthur, this movie that's made in the 60s, that's taking place, you know, I know mythically, but in medieval times. And he's telling them, oh, you know, the map that they currently have shows the Earth being flat because this was what, the 1400s, kind of makes sense. And he's saying that because Merlin has traveled even into the future, that eventually people will find out that it's round, and Arthur's all fascinated. And I was like, holy shit, a movie that's made in the 60s that takes place in medieval times, and this is still a goddamn problem. I mean, how does it make sense that it's flat? If you think it's flat, then you don't believe in gravity, because gravity, hydrostatic equilibrium, will pull objects into a spherical shape. And so if we're on a flat planet, then apples in Australia or some other so-called corner of the world would fall sideways, because in that case, the center of gravity would be at the center of the flat plane. And I'm pretty sure apples don't fall sideways in Australia. So just like use some common sense. I mean, do people think the moon is flat? Like, I just don't understand why the hell Earth would somehow be flat. But granted, these people aren't using logic, because I've encountered many of them before, and literally one flat earther told me that she didn't believe in math. Math is one thing you cannot contest. 1 + 1 is 2. You can give them different words, but the figures are still the same. So when you're dealing with people like that, then what's the point of even having the conversation?
Right. So your answer is spherical, right?
Yes. After all that, it's freaking round. Good Lord.
Would you go to space if you could?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without doubt. Mm-hmm.
One of the most important questions here, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Ooh, that's a great question. I will say Star Wars, just because I didn't grow up with the generation of Star Trek lovers. I believe that was more so before my time. However, I am familiar with the philosophies and the themes that they try to talk about was very ahead of their time. So I respect it. But I will pick Star Wars just because I'm actually not super familiar with Star Trek. I will say though that I did read for the lead in Star Trek Discovery. I didn't get it obviously, but I hear what's going on in the Star Trek world now is not that great. And I'll also pick Star Wars, but only the original and the prequels. I'm not a huge fan of the new movies.
The prequels, oh dear.
Yeah. I know, but I feel like they're still better than the new ones. So, and I was like, I don't know, 8 or 9 when they came out. So I think it was just like, oh, childhood.
Well, you know, when I grew up, I was a Star Wars fan, you know,
Sure.
but later in life, I became a Star Trek fan. It sort of all changed for me, really.
Gotcha.
But are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
That's a good question. I know I definitely come off as cynical and pessimistic, but I think a part of me deep down always does search for hope. So if it's a lame answer, but I'm kind of say 50-50.
Okay. That's fair enough. Let's talk about, so you have a lot of really cool stuff that you're doing out there. You've got a YouTube page, you've got TikTok, you're on Instagram, you have all kinds of different content on all these. Let's talk about your TikTok for a minute. Tell everyone about what you're doing there.
Sure. Well, I started TikTok back in May because I got a little bit sick of Instagram. I had like a decent following, but the only reason I ever got on social media to begin with is because Hollywood told us that we should, that, you know, having a shit ton of followers can help you book roles, which I think is ridiculous, but that's a different subject. So anyway, sure. I found my interest in in Instagram because I enjoy the editing process and making like a beautifully aesthetic page. You find the creativity in it, then you find the enjoyment. Eventually it did grow. And then I started getting free clothes, which was my ultimate goal. So I'm on Instagram for the free clothes, which is great. But then it came to a point this year where I got a little bit tired of the fakeness of it. And I didn't feel as though it was representative enough of my entire personality, which I have a lot more depth and interests in my world that I want to offer to other people if they care. And so I was like, you know, I shat completely on TikTok last year when it came out. I'm like, this is so stupid. Another stupid social media platform. And what do you know? I ended up joining it. And so that's what got me on TikTok in May. And I was like, this is purely going to be about me talking about astronomy. I don't follow any like the hashtag trends and like doing the new dance moves or any of that. Literally, my page is just about talking about the recent astronomical discoveries or just new things that scientific publications have come out with. And so, yeah, so the page is called Talk Nerdy to Me, with talk being T-O-K, like TikTok. I was trying to be funny. And so that's where it's come, but it's grown. I mean, you know, I know people on TikTok have like tens of millions of followers, and recently I just hit 30K, which for me, as someone who this isn't even like a huge priority, was like, oh, cool. And then hopefully maybe it'll just exponentially grow, because it had a little bit of a slow start. But the interesting part that I discovered about TikTok were just how goddamn awful the trolls were. Because I thought, you know, it's just this innocent girl talking about space. What's more innocent than that? And then I got attacked so much by anti-science people who don't have pictures, who don't have any followers, aren't following anyone. They literally just sadly join these platforms to just be a bully because they're miserable with their own lives. But honestly, that kind of further reinvigorated my conviction to keep doing it and almost fight back against this ridiculous science movement that's happening. I don't know if it's throughout the world. I'd hope not, but it certainly is here in the US. And I will say that the vast majority of followers are awesome, and they're space nerds and interested in the subject just like you and I. And so maybe a part of me shouldn't be giving attention to the anti-science people. The only reason I started to is because all of this stuff is now political, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and you have people calling it a hoax, which is so dangerous. I feel as though now science people do honestly have to start fighting back, because it's becoming a problem to the safety of society. And unfortunately, and again, I'm not going to try to get political, but when you have people in the positions of power and leadership who are also talking about conspiracies and not taking this pandemic seriously, that's causing even more problems. So you need people with qualifications. Remember when qualifications mattered, guys? When you had a stupid degree, for God's sake, and that's what made you earn your title, is because you studied your subject instead of just listening to some idiot sitting in his mom's basement spouting out conspiracy theories. Look at people with qualifications and trust what they're saying. And so after that rant, that's the point of my TikTok, is that I'm trying to use it to fight back against anti-science, but also to just enjoy astronomy and share that with people that also enjoy the same subject. And it's part of my branding, even as an actor, is the whole STEM world. So it's also, the purpose of it was to help perpetuate the acting world as well.
That's great. How can people find you out there on the interwebs and social media? Tell everyone where you're at.
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm just my first and last name, Kalpana Pot. That's Kalpana and then Pot. And then I think if you type that into TikTok, you might find me anyway. But on TikTok, again, it's Talk Nerdy to Me with TOK, Nerdy to Me. Yeah, and that's almost it. I mean, I do have a YouTube page. I probably have like a dozen videos, and they were a lot more in-depth astronomy type of lectures, I guess you could say, that I did, but it just, I didn't realize, or no, I did realize that it took so much time to create those, plus the editing. And because social media is not the biggest priority in my life, I'm mostly abandoned YouTube. So you guys can check out my old videos, but I don't really plan on going back to YouTube to create more, unless something huge happened for me in the social media world where, you know, that's what I'm going to get paid to do now. YouTube just takes so much time, which I don't have.
Sure. Do you have a .com?
I don't actually, but I'm on IMDb, and there's like a bunch of actor websites that we all have to be on, but that's just for casting mostly.
Sure.
Yeah, but I mean, I try to be as responsive as I can be on Instagram and TikTok. Sometimes the comments are just so many, and I'm like, okay, I'm bored. I'm not going to reply. But for people who bring up some like a cool comment or something, or if you message me on Instagram, I'm probably not going to always see those. Sometimes I do check like the quote unquote spam folder. So I try to be as responsive as I can be, because I'm not an arrogant person. I mean, it's freaking social media, for God's sake. I'm not going to sit there and act like, oh, you know, I'm this like famous celebrity who's never going to respond to you. It's social media. So I do try to talk to people as much as possible.
Right. Well, I appreciate you coming out to do this.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. It's just honestly just a pleasure to talk to like-minded people and to kind of talk about what I'm trying to do out there in the world. So thank you for giving me that.
I thought, well, this will be a great astronomy chat, but we got into so much more, and I really like how well-rounded it was. It was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I love that too. And I love just, you know, one thing leading to another. There's so much shit to talk about in the world that I'm always down to have intellectual conversations.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming out today, and we'll talk again soon. All right.
Okay. Have a good one. And thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you have it. My interview with Kalpana Pot. I hope you enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun on this episode. We actually talked a lot at the beginning and at the tail end of the episode that didn't even make it into the final cut. So I hope she comes back and we record a part 2 of this, or who knows, maybe she'll have her own podcast one day. That would be exciting. Anyways, I'll see you next week on Quest. Thank you for listening to Quest. Please be sure and rate and review this podcast. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Be sure to visit the official website for the International Association of Metatomics at metatomics.org, or find us on social media for other unique content. And make sure to pick up a copy of the book that started a spiritual revolution, Metatomics, The Grand Design, available for sale online and at most major bookstores. Thanks for listening.